Welcome to this next session of the MHTP Open Week. I'd remind you all of how this works. You're all muted, and the speakers will run through the program, and if you have any questions, if you'd like to put those into the chat function, we'll then answer those at the end in the Q&A session when we've been through the various aspects of this program. So this is the Centre for Endocrinology and Metabolism. I'm Peter Fuller. I'm the head of the centre. And what we're interested is in endocrinology. Endocrinology is the study of hormones and glands and the interactions between those systems, both in disease and in physiology. This is the leading Australian centre both for clinical endocrinology and endocrine research. We're located at Monash Medical Centre, which is just 10 minutes walk from the main Monash University campus. We're closely aligned with the endocrinology unit, Monash Health, and I'll point out a number of the leaders in the unit who are in fact active within that clinical service. We have a range of students in the centre, both vacation students, honours students, master's students and PhD students, and they came from science, medicine, indeed informatics and other aspects of research, including some social scientists. The students are drawn primarily, of course, from Monash University, but we welcome students from other universities and with students currently from both Deakin and Melbourne universities. And the centre is notable for the fact that it crosses the whole range of research disciplines, from basic research through translational research into clinical research, and indeed aspects of population research, of research that infects the broader community rather than just a hospital-based population. Within the centre, there are 7 research groups, and you'll hear from each of these: endocrine hypertension, hormone cancer therapeutics, steroid receptor biology, sex development, cancer drug discovery, metabolic research, and clinical andrology, which I'll speak to as well. And I've just asterisked that, as I said, a number of the group leaders and indeed members of each of those groups, the researchers within those groups, have clinical appointments within Monash Health, which helps to make the research relevant to real people and diseases. And I've just put that little schematic down the bottom to indicate there's an iterative approach to the research that links across these various domains. Now, today we're going to cover each of the research groups in the centre. We'll talk a little bit about finding a project and a supervisor, and then one of our current students will give you a perspective on the student role, and then we'll move to questions. And as I said, post a question at any time in the chat function, and we'll address those during the end of the discussion. My colleague, Professor Rob McLaughlin's not able to be here today, but he'd be happy to talk to you if you're interested in aspects of male reproductive health. He's a world expert on the regulation of spermatogenesis in the context of infertility, and indeed in its role in management of couples with the use of IVF. He's also head of Formerly Male, formerly Andrology Australia, which has a broad public health remit in the area of men's health and men's reproductive health. As I said, I'm Peter Fuller. My area of research is in adrenal steroids and steroid hormone receptors and the regulation of those receptors. Our particular focus is on the mineralocorticoid receptor. Mineralocorticoids are very important in control of salt-water blood balance and therefore blood pressure. They impact on a range of other tissues as well, being also receptors for cortisol. So we're interested in structure and function of the receptor. We've recently published on the evolution of the receptor, aspects of gene re-expression, given that this is a ligand-dependent transcription factor. If we're interested in the way in which it signals and the different modes of signaling, and also roles in tissues outside of the obvious tissues involved in salt balance. And we use novel transgenic mice that we've created and are unique to our laboratory, and also a range of in vitro cellular models that also are unique. And we collaborate widely with other groups, particularly Simon Chu, Jun Yang and Colin Clyne, from whom you'll hear subsequently. And the next group is Dr. Simon Chu, who'll talk about his work. At least that's the theory. Oops.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the introduction. So, yes, I head the Hormone Cancer Therapeutics group, and as you see there, our focus in our group is on the role of hormones and their interactions with cell-specific signaling pathways that are involved in the development of an uncommon form of ovarian cancer known as the granulosa cell tumours. And so in my lab, we use a whole range of molecular approaches and genetic sequencing in order to understand the development of granulosa cell tumours, in order to be able to perhaps find new effective treatment strategies, because these tumours do not respond to your normal chemotherapy. So if I draw your attention to that diagram or that figure there, we actually know one of the early events that occur for normal granulosa cells to become tumorigenic, where they acquire a mutation in this gene called FOXL2. But we don't know the subsequent events, the genetic events that occur for that cancer to become an aggressive or a recurrent cancer. And we don't know whether or not any of those might be targetable. And so if we move to our next slide, then that introduces then the types of projects that I have, whereby firstly we want to understand the molecular pathogenesis of these tumours, where we can understand more so the genomic landscape, the genetic mutations that these tumours acquire, and whether or not these aberrantly expressed genes in advanced disease can be targeted for therapy. I also have an interest in the role of XIAP. It's a protein that's involved in endocrine cancers, such as granulosa cell tumours, but also thyroid cancer. And this is an attractive target for novel anti-cancer treatment. And so the aim of this project is to identify novel therapeutic targets which can be used in combination with inhibiting this particular protein. And we've made some good progress there, and hopefully it'll serve as a precursor to clinical trials. And now we move on to Associate Professor Colin Clyne, who's head of the Cancer Drug Discovery Group.
Thanks, Simon. So my lab focuses on breast cancer, which is the most common cancer affecting Australian women, with about 1 in every 8 women developing breast cancer at some point in their lives. So this equates to about 18,000 new diagnoses every year and just over 3,000 deaths. So really very significant numbers of people. So in the next slide, most breast cancer patients have what's called estrogen receptor positive disease. And this means that their cancers are driven by the female sex hormone estrogen. So as well as the standard treatments, such as surgery, radiation, or chemotherapy, these patients can benefit from drugs that block estrogen action, so-called hormone therapy. And drugs that inhibit estrogen action are very, very effective and really significantly improve patient outcomes. However, in the next slide, there are a number of challenges with hormone therapy that still remain, and these are some of the areas that my lab is interested in. So firstly, about 1/3 of patients have estrogen-independent breast cancer. And so for these individuals, anti-estrogen therapies don't work. So we're very interested in identifying alternative growth-regulating proteins in these cancers, because these proteins could then be targeted to develop new hormone therapies for these estrogen-independent diseases. Secondly, many estrogen receptor positive patients who do respond well to hormone therapies unfortunately go on to become resistant at a later stage, and their cancer then spreads uncontrollably. So we're very keen to understand the mechanisms that underlie this process of resistance so that we can develop strategies to inhibit it. Finally, it's not possible to predict which individual patients will respond well to hormone therapies and who will become resistant. So we're very keen to identify molecules that could predict outcomes from hormone therapy, as this would then help optimize individual treatment strategies. So that's a really quick overview of the research areas in my lab. If you have any questions, you'll have the opportunity to ask them towards the end of the session. So I'll now hand over to Professor Vince Harley, who will outline his work on sex determination.
Thanks, Colin. So we work mainly on mammalian sex determination, and that's a process controlled by the sex chromosomes, X and Y, in mammals. We also work on the birds and the Z and W, but mainly on mammals and humans, where in the week 6 embryo, we're kind of by potential, we can be male or female, but if we have a Y chromosome, a gene called SRY comes on and starts the process of making a testis. And that process of gonadal development, we're very interested in at the molecular and genetic levels, both testis and ovary development. And that's because boy or girl, sometimes the answer is not obvious, and about 1 in 100 children are born intersex, and we're interested in the genetic causes underlying intersex, which are mainly genes involved in gonadal development, and from the viewpoint of genetics, genomics, developmental biology, and biochemistry. A second area of research, next slide, Peter, is that we found that the SRY gene on the Y chromosome is also in the brain of males, where it controls voluntary movement. But more importantly, recently we discovered that in models of Parkinson's disease, SRY is, there's too much SRY produced. And so another aspect of our research is focused on turning down SRY and developing drugs that will do this in disease models of Parkinson's disease. And finally, we're interested in, next slide, Peter. We're interested in what makes you feel like you're a boy or a girl, our so-called gender identity. And we're studying this to try to understand the biological basis of gender identity by looking at the genetics of so-called transsexual individuals, males who identify as females and females who identify as males. And we have the largest cohort of transsexual women in the world, and we've done the largest genetic studies, and we're continuing to grow the cohort and go deeper into our genetic cohort using genetics and statistical methods. So if you're interested in any of these areas of sex development, please contact me. Thank you. And now I'll hand over to Associate Professor Fran Milat.
Thank you, Professor Harley. My name's Fran, and I'm fortunate to lead a clinical and research group at Monash and the Hudson. And my research interest is in osteoporosis in chronic disease and in other underserved populations. At Monash, we're very lucky to have a very large public health service, and we care for over 1.7 million Victorians across a very diverse catchment area. I commenced this group several years ago now, really to meet the unmet need to provide care to patients with osteoporosis and fracture in the context of medical comorbidities and medical chronic disease. Many of the patients that we see and have research projects in include patients with chronic neurological disability, including cerebral palsy, the transfusion-dependent hemoglobinopathies, end-stage renal disease, as well as renal transplantation, patients with paediatric bone conditions transitioning to adult care, women who have had an early menopause or premature ovarian insufficiency, chronic hepatitis and liver disease, cancer survivorship, particularly breast cancer, as well as patients with diabetes. We're fortunate to have multiple PhD projects available, and we've had PhDs in several areas, as you've seen above. Next slide, please, Peter. And this schematic really just identifies several areas of interest both the bone disorders in young adults as well as bone health and chronic diseases, and looks across a spectrum of clinical areas of interest and research areas of interest. Thank you, Peter. Next slide. If you're interested at all in osteoporosis or metabolic bone diseases, please contact me through the Hudson, and my email address is just there. And it's my pleasure now to hand on to Dr. Jun Yang, who is an endocrinologist and scientist in the Hudson.
Thank you, Professor Milat. My name is Jun, and our group, the endocrine hypertension group, is fascinated by high blood pressure because it is the leading cause of death in the world. It's such a highly modifiable risk factor, and yet 2/3 of patients with hypertension have poorly controlled blood pressure. And many of them may not know that they have an underlying endocrine cause, in particular primary aldosteronism, which is the most common endocrine cause caused by the excessive production of aldosterone from the adrenal gland or glands, but it's rarely diagnosed because it's rarely screened for. Next slide, Peter. So the Endocrine Hypertension Service and this research group was set up to integrate the diagnosis and management of primary aldosteronism together with research. Our research starts with the engagement of the community and primary care physicians so as to maximise our reach and increase awareness of this condition. And we move through the diagnostic pathway all the way to confirming the disease, subtyping, that is defining the disease as either requiring medical treatment or surgical treatment. And in the process, we involve multiple disciplines because aldosterone affects not just the blood pressure and cardiovascular system, but also musculoskeletal, neurologic systems. And we developed multi-center collaborations to try and improve the diagnosis and optimize the treatment of this condition. The research encompasses several different themes, including epidemiology, health economics, molecular biology, biomarker discovery, and more. Next, Peter. So the goal of the group is to diagnose every case of primary aldosteronism in all communities, including the disadvantaged populations, in the most time-efficient and cost-effective manner, and to offer efficacious treatment. Sorry, Peter, I think, oops, go back, go forward. And to offer the most efficacious targeted treatment for these patients. Currently, the group is made up of 2 clinician researchers, 2 PhD students, with several more students committed to joining next year. And we're very fortunate to be supported by a clinical research nurse and a senior research assistant. And we also have regular exchanges with the cardiovascular endocrinology group based at the Baker for ongoing education. So please feel free to contact me for any more information about this research area. Thank you.
Thank you, Jun. And just to mention that you can get more information from the student research book, which is available as indicated here on at the Hudson website, and specifically on the Centre of Endocrinology and Metabolism at the Hudson website. And those, all that information will be further available on the web. In terms of how you should find your project, choose your supervisor. Please have a look at the project book. If you've got some of what's been said is exciting you, then talk to the people, introduce yourself, phone, email, Zoom, whatever works for you, see if the project's available, and set up a time then to meet and talk to the people. It may be a virtual meeting at the moment, but ultimately to come into the Institute and see the Institute and talk to the supervisor. If you're getting excited about this, then you should sign up, get involved, and follow your passion. In terms of the specific areas, I think the broad principles are the same. Whether you're an honours student, you need to connect with the supervisor and then liaise with the university department under which you're doing honours. For Masters and PhD, that's done through the Hudson department or in collaboration with other departments. And there's a series of online portals where you can register and confirm your candidature with the university. It's important to start early so that you can organise scholarships and other support. Now, what do you gain from research training? Research training is more than just making some discoveries. It gives you a qualification that demonstrates skill in biomedical research. It teaches you critical thinking, writing and speaking skills. You get exposure to a range of state-of-the-art research platforms. It makes you literate in science in a way that a simple undergraduate degree doesn't give you, and it allows you to interact with a range of colleagues who are committed to improving human health well-being and contributing also in more broadly to human knowledge. So I'm going to ask Renata Libianto, who's a current student, to talk to you just briefly about her experience as a student at the Hudson Institute.
Thanks, Peter. Just quickly share my journey so far. I did my undergrad in MBBS and BMed Science, and then spent the following 7 years in clinical training. A few years ago, I decided I wanted to do a PhD, so I met with my supervisors in 2017 and planned a project, and I commenced my PhD last year. I then went on a few months of maternity leave and passed my first PhD milestone in May. So what I have enjoyed with my PhD so far, I've learned a lot of lab skills. Prior to starting my PhD, I've never worked in a lab before, so everything was new and everything was interesting, very interesting. I have enjoyed being part of the research group, and even though I have my own project there in the light blue box, there have been opportunities to be involved in other related projects and to be involved in collaboration with other groups, which I think is really amazing. And finally, I've been fortunate to be able to integrate research with clinical practice, which makes it all very relevant and very satisfying. Thanks.
So Simon, do you?
I'll just talk about the Hudson Institute Student Society. So for those who are wanting to be a student at the Hudson, you'll join about between 150 and 200 other students who are studying at the Hudson Institute. And so we have a very active student society, as you can see in that slide there, which organises periodically throughout the year a whole lot of get-togethers. Not in COVID-19, obviously, but next year we certainly will be able to have these, hopefully these, some of these events. But the Student Society is there as an active way for you to interact with other students, and as well as that, because you're only down the road from Monash, potentially too, you can interact up there. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. Now we'll move on to taking questions now, and feel free to put any questions up on the chat function to any of the panel that's been participating. I notice a number of questions have already been answered. The current question I've got at the moment is, do I need to have an MBBS qualification to join research programs at the Hudson? The answer is absolutely not. Hudson has students with a whole range of backgrounds. Probably the majority of students, in fact, come from the biomedical science and biomedical science streams, with probably actually a minority who are medical graduates, but we have welcomed students in all areas of science and indeed medicine. I don't know whether any of the panel wanted to comment on the questions that have already been answered in the chat function.
There are a couple of questions for Colin in there. I don't know if Colin is able to have a look.
Colin's answered those ones.
Someone just raised hand. So should we let them ask the question?
Absolutely.
Sure, if I can do that.
I think they just unmute themselves maybe. Hold on. Who was it that raised their hand?
It's not possible for unmuting. They just need to post by the chat.
So,
Oh, okay. Right.
so there was a question about whether international students are eligible to apply for the Vacation Scholarship Program. The answer to that is yes. That's for the whole audience. The answer to that is yes. Anybody is eligible for that program. Just as you'll see the links later on or on the website, go to those links.
There's a question here about whether can we propose other topics of research when pursuing research at the Hudson. I guess the general answer is yes, but clearly it has to be in the context of the area of investigation. But there is a great diversity both of topic and technology, technique, approach within the Hudson, so it's very unlikely that you can't address what you'd like to address, but the formulation of your research program is very much a conversation between the supervisor that you've chosen and your areas of interest and passion. Let me have a look if there's any other. There's a question about, oh, that's been answered, about how to apply for vacation scholarships. I guess I'd emphasise again that the website is very useful for identifying the various pathways to engaging and indeed enrolling for programs, be they vacation, honours or higher degrees. Okay, we've got a couple more. Here's a question from Nick. Who's asking when the project booklet will be updated for 2022. I would suggest to you that the changes between years are generally subtle, and I would commend you to start to explore your interests with the current handbook, and then the updated version will usually come out about the middle of the year or July, just leading into these interactions. But for some, there are sometimes mid-year entries and some funding programs that are very much middle of the year, in which case I would encourage you to just engage the supervisors based on the 2021 book. Okay, well, we're just about done. Did any of the panel have any other thoughts or comments they want to make before we move to the next session?
I just maybe make one point, and that is that we have access to world-class technology facility here at a platform facility which covers a whole range of different high-end technologies, which we all in our research projects make use of. And it's more of a centralized type of platform, the technologies that we utilize, but it's accessible to all the researchers.
Okay, well, we're just about at time, so I think the next session is with the Centre for Innate Immunity and Infectious Diseases, and I think Gabby is going to transfer you to that session.